back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to do a very exciting video. One of, well, in fact, 3 of my most watched videos ever are along the same theme as this, my top 10 fantasy series. I believe I did 2 videos in 2014 and 1 in 2016 about this topic, where I go through 10 series in fantasy that I absolutely love and tell you guys about them. And it's been a long time since 2016, 4 years in fact, so I thought it was about time to do an update to that with a lot of the series that I have recently found or found over the last few years that I absolutely love and I think should be on my sort of top 10 fantasy series ever list. So I've made sure not to double up on any of the series from the previous videos, and a lot of those series in fact are still some of my top series. So if you haven't seen them, I'll link all 3 videos below and you can go and watch them, and hopefully that will give you some ideas if the ones in this video aren't enough for you. But I wanted to go through 10 new series or series that I've read over the last 4 years that I absolutely love and think are some of the best that fantasy has to offer that I have read. So let's get started. There's no order to this necessarily, but they're all fantastic and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why. The first book I have to show you is the first one in the Darkwater Legacy series. This is by Chris Wooding. It's called The Ember Blade and the cover looks like that. This is obviously an ARC copy. This one came out in September of 2018 and the second book is not yet out, but this is a story which is so fun. It's filled with high classic fantasy themes, but it's got twists on those old themes and it becomes quite a new story as you read it. Even though it does have hints of the familiar, it's definitely got new stuff which is enough to, I hope, entice you in. As I say, there's only this book out at the moment, so it's a great time to jump on board with the series, and I hope that the next book will be coming out fairly soon because I absolutely loved this one and I just flew through it when I read it. We follow 2 main characters who are called Aren and Cade, and they're like best friends, but one day one of them gets thrown into a prison camp and the other one sort of follows, and then they have to try and escape from there with the help of a man who is very mysterious and is kind of looking to recruit them into something. And I don't want to say much more than that, besides that this is a chunky old book and it's so worth the read. I loved this. I thought it was excellent. Chris Wooding has done a brilliant job with his first kind of epic fantasy in this book, so I'm really excited to see where the series goes and I hope you guys will pick it up and read it. So that's series number 1. The next series I have to talk about is another huge chunky one, and of course you guys didn't expect me to do a top series ever video in fantasy and not include some Robin Hobb. So here it is. I have the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. This is the final trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings. There are, I believe, 16 books in the whole series if you read from the very beginning up to the very end, which is this one, Assassin's Fate. And these are some of the most heart-wrenching, emotional books in the entire series. I love the Realm of the Elderlings, but this series and the Tawny Man series, which was in one of my previous series videos, is my favourite by far. It's just emotional, it's heart-wrenching, it's beautiful, it is evocative, it's lovely, and it's everything I love to read about. So if you love emotional characters, if you love kind of a really rich, deep, intense world with a lot of magic, then this is definitely a series I'd recommend. However, please don't start with the Fitz and the Fool series because it will only have the impact it has if you've read the previous books in the Realm of the Elderlings. And Robin Hobb is my favourite, so you guys know I'm constantly recommending you guys to read her, so please do. But this is another series which is definitely one of my top ever now since having read it. I don't think I'd read this series when I did my last update, so definitely highly recommend this whole series. The next series I want to talk about is the Dandylion Dynasty. This is by Ken Liu and it is an Oriental Asian inspired fantasy with a lot of really interesting concepts that you don't see that often in Western style fantasies. This has a lot of focus on war and on peace and on kind of introspection. The characters, again, are really, really well fleshed out, and there are currently 2 books in the series, so it's not a complete series just yet, but I believe the 3rd book is due out in 2020, so fingers crossed. This is epic in all senses of the word. The characters are vast and exciting, and they have a lot of emotional ups and downs over the course of the story, and the world itself is huge. There's a lot of new inventions that get discovered, there's a lot of new exciting technology that's coming in, and there's also the traditional side of things, which is harking back to the warrior roots, harking back to scholars and introspection and kind of reflection, which is all great stuff. So if you're at all like me and you really enjoy kind of Asian inspired stuff, then this is an epic fantasy series I would highly recommend you guys check out, the Dandylion Dynasty by Ken Liu. The next series I want to talk about is the Split World series by Emma Newman. We start with Between Two Thorns and go all the way through these 5 books. The first 3 are kind of like a trilogy, and then the final 2 are a little bit more of an add-on to that trilogy, I suppose. I don't think there was originally planned to be 5, but it works really well as a 5. So I really recommend this series. It is dark, and there's some really brutal moments that happen to some of our main characters, but it's a really interesting concept. It's a world where there are 3 different worlds kind of overlapping that you can go between, the split worlds, and these worlds are just completely different in everything that they have within them. One is the human mundane world and one is like the fairy world, and there's a lot that happens in the crossover between these worlds. We follow a main character who kind of gets sucked into the underworld, essentially the world where magic is going on, and she kind of gets pulled into all this different contracts and different stuff that has to do with fairies and the Fae. The Fae are dark and evil, so it's a really twisty kind of turny story. It's quite light reads, I mean not light in tone necessarily, but quick to get through because the books are not that long, and I love it. I think it's an excellent series, and it's just one that I really recommend to a lot of people. I also feel like it's a little bit underrated. I don't hear so many people talk about this series, but I really think it's a great one, so I would definitely recommend this. The next series I have to recommend is this one, the Memoirs of Lady Trent series by Marie Brennan. This series is a 5-book series, which I believe now has a follow-up series starting as well. I haven't read it yet, but I've got the first book to read, and I love the Memoirs of Lady Trent. Again, these are similar sizes to the Split World books. They're quite short, but they have a lot of emotion and a lot of plot in them for books that are so short. This follows a lady scientist who is determined to get into the field of researching dragons. Dragons are not big, epic, crazy beasts in this, in the same way you think of them in like other fantasies. They're a lot more sort of reptilian, and there's seafaring ones. There's all sorts of different things. But our main character, Lady Trent, really wants to become someone who is an authority on dragons. She is determined to overcome her gender, which in the time this is set, women don't really do this kind of exploration. She's determined to overcome her gender, go out in the world and find out about dragons and study them. And that's kind of the whole concept of this entire series, but there's a lot more that goes on with other kind of characters that she interacts with along the way and the dragons that she interacts with. There's also beautiful illustrations in these if you get the physical editions. So it's a wonderful series and I highly, highly recommend picking it up. The next series I have is by Sebastian de Castell. I'm going to put up pictures because I can't seem to find the books on my bookshelf at the moment, but my bookshelf is kind of chaos, so that's not that surprising. All of the books in this series are fantastic. We follow kind of a duo in this who are rip-roaring adventurers, and they are just so funny, so enjoyable to read about. This is definitely more of a light-hearted fantasy in that there's a lot of humour and a lot of banter between the 2 main characters, and we're following them on their adventures to kind of try and become Greatcoats again. This was an order that was kind of disbanded and is now kind of clinging on by the skin of its teeth, but we follow the characters as they try and bring it back, and they try and do good in a world which has definitely kind of gone to the bad. It's a very enjoyable series, and it's one that I think is very easy reading to get into, but well worth being on this list because it has so many good moments and lots of surprises as well whilst you're reading it, which I didn't see coming. So I highly, highly recommend checking out this series as well. The next series I have, I think there are 3 or 4 books out at the moment. I only own the first one in physical edition, but I have read the first 3, I think, and I got the 4th. And this is the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan. Sullivan writes fantastically. He is an author who I've followed for quite a long time and really enjoy his work. And his work is usually quite lighthearted, very similar in tone to the Greatcoats series, the one I just talked about. But this is a slightly different skew on his work because this series is much more classic fantasy. It really deals with older characters, dwarves and elves and that sort of thing. It's all based around older classic stereotyped fantasy characters that you would find in Lord of the Rings, for example. However, Michael J. Sullivan puts his own twist on it, and it's a very interesting series which follows a kind of rivalry between 2 different factions, essentially the humans and the elves. And the elves are very, very powerful. They have a lot of magic. The humans, they really don't, but they do have the ability to work together, the ability to come together in times of need and fight back. And this follows a kind of band of travellers and a band of adventurers who are fighting back against the system in the time of the First Empire. This is also a kind of prelude series to his actual Hadrian and Royce series, which is set in the same world many, many thousands of years later. So if you have read his Hadrian and Royce series, then I would definitely recommend kind of coming back to this as well, because it gives you a lot more insight into how the whole world's set up, which I really, really enjoy. And I think this is one of his better series for dealing with female characters, because some of his Re-Area books don't really have many female characters. This has a lot more and is done really, really well. So highly recommend this series as well. The next series I have to recommend is actually kind of aimed at kids, and I only have the second book because I've lent the first book to my sister. That is Nevermore, and the second one is Wondersmith. I loved this series when I picked it up. It reminded me so much of the nostalgia that I had for reading books like Harry Potter when I was younger, books like The Worst Witch and Series of Unfortunate Events and Artemis Fowl, all those kind of books that were some of my favourites when I was a kid. I got the same nostalgia and the same emotion and fun from this series. It was just a series that focused on one young girl who gets sucked into the world of magic, and it's her adventures while she's there. She doesn't really know what to expect when she comes to Nevermore, and in fact Morrigan Crow, that's her name, is just kind of an exception to a lot of the magical world and the mundane world because she thinks quite outside the box. So it's a really interesting series. It really challenges kind of the mindset of kids, and it's just got a lot of fun to it. It's very adventurous, very enjoyable, and I highly recommend picking this up, especially if you have kids, but even if you don't, because I really enjoyed it and I don't have kids and I think it's excellent. So I would highly recommend the Nevermore series. I believe there's going to be more in the series, so I'm looking out for them when they come out as well. But such a beautiful cover as well, you can't go wrong. It's lovely. So yeah, really recommend this series, especially for younger readers. Next up, I actually want to include an urban fantasy series, which I audiobook, so I don't have the physical editions, but I'm going to put some pictures up. And this is the Heartstrikers series by Rachel Aaron. I do not tend to gravitate towards urban fantasy, but this is a series that I love, and whenever there is a new book by Rachel Aaron, I always pick it up now because I think she's excellent. This series focuses on a kind of relationship between a dragon and a mage and their adventures together as they kind of try and uncover what's really going on with the world and also fight back against the system. There are relationships with the dragon families that are very tricky to politically get around, and then there's also relationships in the mage world and the human world, and there's so much that happens. It's a lot of fun. It is set in our kind of real world, but it's an alternate version of that called the DMZ, and it's kind of modelled around I think somewhere in America, but it's a really interesting sort of urban fantasy series that really fleshes out the characters as well as the world and doesn't feel stale, and I think that's quite fresh in the urban genre for me. I tend to find a lot of urban is quite crime focused, and this definitely has an element of that, but really it's about the characters and the relationship they have and the adventures they go on, and I really enjoyed all of the books in this series. I'd also highly recommend picking it up on audio, because I think the audiobook is great, which is why I have bought all of them in that form, and I just think it's an excellent urban fantasy series. And I know that she has also recently released some new books in a new series which I think follow on or focus on different characters from the same series, so I'm very excited to start reading that at some point soon. And then the final series, which I'm going to talk to you guys about in this video, is this one, The Chronicles of Scenaries by Jodie Taylor. This series is one of my all-time favourites. There are loads of books. I think there's about 10 now, something like that. I don't actually own all of them in physical. I listen to all of them on audio, which again, I would highly recommend the audiobooks for these because they are so well voice acted. But I love the series so much, I have started picking them up in physical whenever I see them on a deal or anything like that, or whenever a new one comes out. So the very first one is called Just One Damn Thing After Another, and it follows a group of time adventurers, basically. They go back in time to find out what really happened, and it's very British, very quintessentially British. There's a lot of tea drinking, a lot of British humour, and a lot of really interesting kind of historical adventures that they go to. This definitely feels like it's a blend of sci-fi and fantasy, because the time travel is obviously sci-fi, but the fantasy element comes through the adventure of these characters and the way that they deal with situations, and I just think it's great. So I highly recommend this. I think I've talked about it on my channel before, but honestly, it's one of my favourite series, and anytime Jodie Taylor brings out a new book now, I snatch it up pretty quick because I love her stuff. So I highly recommend this series as well, especially on audio, but definitely in physical too. So that, my friends, is everything that I have for this video. I hope this has given you some ideas of my favourites in fantasy right now, some of the authors I particularly love, but also some of the styles. There's quite a range of light-hearted and heavier epic fantasy in these books, so hopefully there's something that you guys can take away from this and go and pick up and binge read the series. I'd love to hear your favourite series in the comments below, and please do go and watch my previous videos, though excuse, some of the really old ones were a long time ago, so I feel like I look and sound quite different in them because I was a lot more nervous making videos back then. But I'd love to have your thoughts on everything I've mentioned here and some of the videos that I'm linking below. Go and let me know if any of those series are your favourites as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.